Jesus did not create the church in the way we usually mean it. He intentionally left no religious hierarchy, did not establish a priestly caste, did not write bylaws, and did not define the form of a future institution. On the contrary, his words were bluntly simple. You are all brothers. He spoke of the kingdom of God as a family of children of the same Father, of spiritual brotherhood rather than a religious system. After that, he left the earth without having built any global social or religious institution. History took its own course. The very first generation of disciples began to form communities, choose leaders, set the order of worship, and formulate teaching. Gradually, what we call the church emerged. Mentors became clergy, brotherhood turned into organization, and living faith acquired institutions. Does that mean the disciples betrayed their teacher? Only partly. They did drift from the original simplicity of his design, but not entirely by their own choice. They ran up against a law of human history. Personal spiritual faith is extraordinarily hard to pass on to later generations. While a great teacher is present, his word and personal example are enough. But when he is gone, people need community, tradition, shared prayer, teachers, and a certain way of life. Without these, a movement quickly falls apart. Similar processes occur far beyond religion. In pedagogy, there is the concept of scaffolding, temporary structures that support learning. A person almost never masters a complex idea all at once. First, they are given a provisional framework that helps them climb higher. When understanding matures, the scaffold is no longer needed. Nobody builds a house for the sake of the scaffolding, yet sometimes it is impossible to build the house without it. Nature gives a similar image. A caterpillar cannot immediately become a butterfly. It creates a cocoon that restricts movement and seems to enclose it in a tight shell. But it is precisely inside that shell that the transformation takes place. The cocoon is not the goal of development, but without it, the birth of the butterfly would be impossible. The same perspective can be applied to the history of Christianity. The church became a kind of cocoon that preserved the gospel, survived persecution, transmitted the faith to new generations, and united millions of people. It fulfilled a historical task that an unorganized movement alone could hardly have accomplished. But that does not mean the organization itself is the highest aim. A means easily begins to look like an end. Scaffolding covers the building, and over time, people start admiring the scaffolds and forget the house. The cocoon becomes more familiar than the butterfly. This happens whenever a temporary form outlives the purpose for which it was created. So, the question about the future of Christianity is not about destroying the church or abandoning community. It is about returning to the original center. Organization must once again devote itself to serving brotherhood, not replace it. Institutions can preserve memory, help people grow and bring them together, but they cannot take the place of living faith. Perhaps this is what the next stage of development looks like. Not the annihilation of the church, but its transformation. Not the rejection of shared life, but the search for a form in which what Jesus began becomes primary again. Not power, not hierarchy, and not a religious system, but brotherhood, a family of God's children united by love. Many skeptics will say, that's impossible. But how many can recognize the beautiful butterfly inside a dark, off-putting cocoon? Everything in its time. If church organization arose as a historical necessity, the next question is, how much organization is needed? Where is the line between order that helps life and a system that exists for its own sake? The answer should not be sought in the later history of the church, but in the community Jesus created. Jesus did have an organization, but it was extremely simple. There were 12 apostles, a wider circle of disciples, and many followers. There were assignments, a shared mission and responsibilities, but no priestly caste, no complex hierarchy, no mandatory membership or bylaws. He called his disciples friends and brothers. Authority arose not from office, but from trust and the ability to serve. From this follows a simple criterion. There should be only as much organization as is necessary for shared life and common mission. It should coordinate people, not determine their spiritual worth. Any structure that begins to exist for its own preservation ceases to serve its purpose. A contemporary community could be built on exactly that principle. You don't join it, you begin to live in it. Instead of a permanent clergy, there are recognized mentors whose authority rests not on rank, but on maturity and trust. Communities gather where it is convenient, in homes, parks, cafes, or rented rooms. Instead of long services, you have a shared meal, prayer, reading of the gospel, open discussion, mutual aid, and the planning of good works. The center is not a theological system, but the person of Jesus and the question of how to put his words into practice today. Offerings remain voluntary and are directed primarily to help people and to the work of the mission, not to sustain an elaborate administrative apparatus. Such a community does not reject preaching. On the contrary, as in Jesus' time, among the disciples there can be those who devote themselves entirely to the mission. They travel, form new brotherly groups, support existing communities, and then move on. They do not create a new caste of priests. They help people become independent disciples. This principle is familiar outside religion as well. A scientific laboratory exists because of a shared purpose, not because of a mass of instructions. A good university is valued for the freedom to research, not for the volume of internal regulations. Organization is necessary, but it remains an instrument, not an object of worship. Perhaps that is why the most fitting name for such a community is the English word fellowship, companionship, brotherhood. It denotes fraternal communion, shared life, and a common mission. It speaks primarily of people, not of an institution. Such a community preserves organization but makes it almost invisible, so that at the center once again stands not an institution, but the teacher and his friends.